Thank you so much for coming out. Welcome everyone on this beautiful fall day as we kick off the 2024 Family and Friends Weekend here at the University of Maine. And we're treated to some wonderful analysis from Charlie Cook about what is certainly one of the most critical elections in U.S. history. I'd especially like to thank, as we get started, President Joan Free Mundy and Secretary William Cohen for helping to make this lecture possible. I'm Richard Powell, Director of UMaine's William S. Cohen Institute for Leadership and Public Service, and also the John Mitchell Nickerson Professor of Political Science. And I'd like to start with just a very brief word about the Cohen Institute. Our mission at the Cohen Institute is to train future generations of leaders in the same spirit of public service that has guided the career of our namesake, Secretary William Cohen. Leaders who are ethical, visionary, innovative, civil, thoughtful, and independent-minded in the service of this state, the United States, and the world. And we do so through our interdisciplinary minor in leadership studies, our Washington, D.C. travel course held each May, a Washington semester internship program with the Political Science Department that we're co-sponsoring now in its 67th year, an early college pathway in leadership and public service that allows Maine's high school students to learn about leadership and get a significant head start on their college studies, and numerous other programs that you can learn about from our website at the Cohen Institute. Now, turning to today's very special event. We are incredibly honored to be hosting Charlie Cook to get his perspective on the 2024 elections, and as time allows, to answer some of the questions that you may have about the elections as they are unfolding. Charlie Cook is known to most people in this room. He's widely considered to be one of the nation's leading authorities on American politics and elections. In 1984, Charlie founded the independent, nonpartisan Cook Political Report, serving as its editor-in-chief and publisher for 36 years. The New York Times has called the publication a newsletter that both parties regard as authoritative. His data and analysis have been used by hundreds of political scientists in their own work, including in my own research on congressional and presidential elections. For the last 26 years, he has written a weekly column for National Journal, as well as co-authoring the 2020, 2022, 2024 editions of the Almanac of American Politics, and the upcoming 26. And upcoming again in 2026. Don't cheat me out there. Over the years, and this is probably where many of you have seen him, Charlie has served as a consultant to CBS News, CNN, and NBC News, appearing on NBC's Meet the Press numerous times. In 2010, he was honored with the American Political Science Association's Kerry McWilliams Award for having made a major journalistic contribution to our understanding of politics. He served as resident fellow at the Institute of Politics at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government in 2013, and he currently holds the Kevin P. Riley Senior Chair in Political Communications at LSU's Manship School of Mass Communications, where he is currently teaching a weekly seminar on the 2024 elections. We had a chance to talk about that and his experience teaching on a college campus this semester. So, dear guests, please join me in welcoming Charlie Cook to the University of Maine.
Thank you very much, Richard. It's an honor to be here. What he didn't say was that my wife and I moved to Maine 3.5 years ago. And well, you like been saying for younger folk, there are a lot of people that are moved to this state, and there's a reason they moved. Maybe they did accomplish something more or less in life and made money elsewhere, and they had the option to go lots and lots of places, and they chose Maine. And don't want to get all misty-eyed, but this is a wonderful, wonderful state. We live down in Harpswell, which I tell people is it's a suburb of Laneswick, but anyway. But I just love being here, and I like to tell people that I was born and raised in Louisiana, that I, moved to Washington and spent 49 years there, and then we moved here back in 21. But first, something about Bill Cohen. For those young people, you could not possibly find a better model public servant than Bill Cohen. And it's just a great story, and it's one that we don't hear so much anymore. And, here's a kid from Bangor, goes to college, graduates from law school, and comes back here, gets elected in the city council, gets elected mayor, wins a seat in Congress, then gets elected to the U.S. Senate. And while he was in the House, while he was in the Senate, developed a reputation for being incredibly bipartisan, where he put, the interest of the country, the right thing above party. And to think, if one of the only 3 Republicans to vote in favor of impeachment back with President Nixon, and which, it was, not a real easy thing to do. But he developed such a reputation for being bipartisan and being so impressive. I can only think of one since, maybe there have been 2 people who were members of Congress of one party and picked for a cabinet slot by a president of the other party. And the other one I'm thinking about wasn't like a major department, wasn't like Department of Secretary of Defense. So anyway, you couldn't find a just more stellar example of a public servant. And so I'm really, really glad that they've created this institute. I like to tell people that I was born and raised in Louisiana. What a lot of people don't realize is that George Washington was actually not born in Virginia. He was born in Louisiana. And when he was a little boy, he found his father's axe and he chopped down a mimosa tree in their garden. And his father confronted him, asked him, and he said, "Yes, Father, I cannot tell a lie. I did chop down the mimosa tree." And his father just shook his head and said, "Son, we're going to have to move to Virginia. Because the king can't fly, we'll never Louisiana politics." So anyway, that's sort of where I learned politics. Well, I went off to college. In fact, I'm sure Maine cannot say that. We once had a sitting governor, that was put in an insane asylum. It was all along. And there's actually a great movie called Blaze that was more or less accurate with Paul Newman inexplicably playing World War. But this true story, though, is eminent. How Governor Long got out of the insane asylum. He fired the state commissioner of hospitals, and then put a new one in that then had him discharged from the insane asylum. One last Louisiana story that we'll get back after his election is that some of you, maybe the younger folks may not, but there's, old song, "You Are My Sunshine." It was written by Jimmy Davis, who was a country, I guess now we call him country western singer, but he was that before he got elected governor. But what a lot of people don't realize is that sunshine was his force, and that the governor's office was seen on the 3rd or the 4th floor of the Capitol building, and which is one of 2. I think Nebraska's the only other one that's kind of like a skyscraper type, but it's this hard big and that goes up. But anyway, he once took his horse. He wanted to show his horse the governor's office. Someone said it was the first time they'd ever had an entire horse in the governor's office. Just think about it. That's right. So anyway, about this election 39 days from now. It's I know everybody's heard, the country's evenly divided, but just think about this for a second. In 2020, Donald Trump carried 25 states. Joe Biden carried 25 states plus the District of Columbia. And in 2016, Donald Trump had 306 electoral votes. 306. You remember, you need 270. So 306. And Hillary Clinton received 232. So 306, 232. So fast forward 4 years later, Joe Biden wins 306 electoral votes, and Donald Trump gets 232 electoral votes. But basically, Democrats sort of start off with a lock. You could say 19 states, or you could, they're some on the cusp. If Democrats are having like a really, really bad night. I mean, let's say, hypothetically, after the first debate, it's entirely possible that President Biden might have lost, one of, maybe New Hampshire, maybe maybe Virginia, maybe New Mexico, maybe Minnesota. But it'd have to be a really, really bad night for a Democrat to lose those. And conversely, for a Republican, if they were having like a really, really bad night, it was conceivable they could lose Florida or Texas, but it'd have to be a really, really, really bad night. But basically, we come down, when you sort of boil down, just sort of push probabilities where they are, and we come down, everybody goes to seven swing states, and it's really kind of almost like unanimous if these are the seven. And that, they've got the three that across the Frost Belt that were the three that cost Hillary Clinton the 2016 election, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and then four across the Sun Belt, Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina. But if you think of those seven states for a second, if Donald Trump carried all seven of them, he would hit 312 electoral votes, and Vice President Harris would get 226. So 312 to 226. So he would have 42 more than necessary to win. If Harris won all seven, she would hit 319 electoral votes, so seven more, and to 219 for Trump, so 49 more than you need. Now, a lot of you are probably thinking, well, nobody's going to get all set. And you're probably right. You probably are right. But 2016, what happened? Donald Trump carried 6 out of 7. What happened? All except for Nevada. 2020, Joe Biden wins 6 out of 7, all except for North Carolina. And these things, besides the fact that it's an odd number, they don't sort of split down the middle. I mean, you're more often than not, one side, there's either, maybe a late gust of wind or some development here or there, where they tend to kind of go lopsided one way or the other. And so you never know, you have to kind of be prepared either way. But I get a kick out of people that every time a new poll comes out, they start obsessing that somebody moved up or down. Like Fox News this morning released polls in Arizona and Georgia, and one had I think Harris up by 3, the other down 2, but they had reverse order before. And whatever you might think of Fox News, their polling is actually quite good. It's as good as it's up there the same tier pretty much as the NBC poll, Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Siena College, which is kind of gold standard, Pew Research Center. So it really is a very good poll. But the thing is that they're just moving. But these 7 states, you're basically all dead even, or somebody had by 1 or 2, maybe occasionally 3. Every once in a while you have a random 4. But the thing is that they're so close that even in the golden era of polling, when it was easiest to do a poll, which would be defined as the 1960s, 70s, maybe the 80s, we had universal telephone service. Everybody had a phone. They were all landlines, no cells. You had no caller ID. You had no voicemail, and telemarketers hadn't burned them out. And so that was like in those days, you could draw with some degree of confidence, a pretty representative sample of Americans. Today, it's really, really, really hard. In fact, I read something with the last national survey that the New York Times did. I think they called it 100-something. They made 100-something thousand calls in order to get 1,000 or 1,200 completions, something like that. And where it really, if you were doing everything perfectly, it's hard to get a representative sample now, given just the challenges of polling. But even in those days, split hair between a point or two, it just, just call it tie. I mean, that's sort of really where it is. But then think of a couple of other things. We've had 2 elections in a row where the Trump vote was undersampled, underrepresented, and where the last round of polls, for a little while, were undersampling Trump and were oversampling, either Hillary Clinton or, to a lesser extent, but Joe Biden as well. So here's the question: have the pollsters who have been working really, really hard to sort of crack that, how do they do it? Have they fixed it? Or have they overcompensated? You don't know. So people that are obsessing about a movement of a point or two, it's like, oh, come on. This is not a Rubik's Cube where if you think and study it close enough, you can solve it. We're not going to know. Before the election, heck, we may not know. Election, we may not know. It could be days before we find out, particularly with part of it is, even just completely innocently, you're going to have local election officials. I think it's going to be a really slow count because given having people that have jumped all over them for 4 years, sometimes with no justification, probably there was some, but jump out, they're going to want to dot every I, cross every T. They're going to double, triple check because they don't want the harassment or what was that poor woman that was who was the Secretary of State in Florida and approved and the whole butterfly. Nobody wants something like that. So I think they're going to be really deliberate when they do this count. Now, when you think 2016 and 20, now I should probably talk about polling just one more minute. Polling was never quite as precise as a lot of people seem to think it was. I don't think they're as horrible as some people think they are now, but it's not, it is much harder to do a poll, a good poll now than it ever was. But a lot of this comes from 2016. And 2016, you'll hear people say, the polls were in there. They said Hillary Clinton was going to win. And so a lot of times what I'll do is I'll say, which one? Well, the national polls said Hillary Clinton was going to win. And if I'm in a bad mood and want to be nasty, and we're talking about everything, everyone's, sometimes I'll want to say something now. Well, say, what were the last round? The average had Hillary Clinton ahead by 3 percentage points nationwide. Very next. But in the real clear politics average. And what did she end up with? She won the national popular vote, which is it's measured like 2.4 percentage points. Now, to be honest, it never occurred to me that there'd be a closer than 0.6 of a point. I think that's pretty good. But a lot of people were conflating the Electoral College and the popular vote, and no pollster breaks out a national trade by state. They're just talking about the national popular vote. That's what the national polls do. That's why we're now focusing a lot more on state polls than we used to. But the thing is, they just assumed that it would go the same way. Now, I'm going to talk about that, but let me do this now, come back. You can tell I have ADD, and I'll take my second early in the day to take that. I tested actually out a little. But anyway, 2016. Now, she has, Hillary Clinton wins the popular vote by 2.4%, right? Roughly 5 million about it. And Donald Trump wins Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania by a grand total combined of 78,000 votes. Now, 78,000 total, wow. But then fast forward to 2020, where Joe Biden wins the national popular vote by 4.5 percentage points, basically about 7 million votes. But when you break it down by state, Turns out it's a total of 126,000 votes scattered across 4 states. Again, oh, that's not much of a margin. And for people to fixate on national polls, it's like one of those football games and ignoring the score, just looking at total yardage game, or a soccer or hockey game and paying attention to shots on goal as opposed to, say, goals. I mean, it's a useful, statistic and all that, but that's not how you do it at all. So a lot of this is confusion. Now, I think, and we'll talk about the race more in just a minute, but the chances of there being another one of these inversions where the popular vote goes one way, she's not jumping all over everywhere here. Wow, how did you can tell what happened, but I don't pay as much attention to Biden, but of an inversion. Now, Democrats have won the national popular vote in 5 out of the last 6 elections. 5 out of 6. The only one they didn't was 2004 when George W. Bush was running for re-election. 5 out of 6. But they only won the presidency in 3 out of 6. So you think, gee, that's kind of something. And when you think about in the 17, the period of the 1700s when we were already a country, but 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, we had 3 versions total in that entire period of time, with the most recent 1888. So we went 112 years without another inversion, and people basically forgot that the Electoral College is kind of technicality. I mean, always end up set, right? And then we have Bush v. Gore, and you're came down to 537 votes in Florida. But people kind of looked at it after 2000 and said, well, it's kind of a fluke. And then they forgot about it again until 2016, when they already won popular vote and Trump won the Electoral College. But there's a reason why we're seeing this over and over again. And just back up, after World War II, well, it's what I call wasted votes. Some people will call it excess votes. But basically, the Republican vote around the country is more efficiently distributed than the Democratic vote. Now, what am I saying? If you keep in mind, and 48 states, winners take off. And everybody here knows, obviously, the state gets the number of electors for the 2 U.S. senators, and 1 for each House seat that they have. And Maine and Nebraska are the 2 exceptions to the rule. And as you all know, it's, whoever wins the first congressional district of Maine gets that one. Whoever wins the second one gets that one. And whoever carries bigger state, the statewide vote, because the other 2, Nebraska does that with their 3. And frankly, I think the 2 kind of innovative things that Maine does is, I think that congressional district, and we can talk about later if you want, but I think it's actually kind of a good compromise between junking the Electoral College or just going to a straight popular vote or not. I think it's actually a pretty good idea, the other being ranked choice voting. But anyway, once for focusing on their 48 states and the District of Columbia is 3, once you win a state by 1 vote, just 1 vote, everything a candidate gets above that point, it's wasted. Now, it shows up when you do a national poll, it shows up in the national popular vote, but it has no effect whatsoever on the outcome of the election, right? That is where it's no. But if you looked at 2020, for example, and you rank the 50 states by how many wasted votes they have, you Republican, Democrat, but how many wasted votes do they have? You look at the top 10. The top 8 were states that Biden carried. You had California, where, for example, Biden won 11.1 million to 6 million. So Biden had 5.1 million wasted votes in California. No impact. Last one. No impact on the outcome. New York State, 2 million wasted votes. Massachusetts, 1.2 million each, and Illinois and Maryland, about 800,000. Washington State, about 750,000 in New Jersey. All wasted votes. You have to get down to numbers 8, 9, and 10 Tennessee, Texas, and Alabama, and the biggest of those, let's see, Tennessee was 700,000, a little touch over 700,000. So, and this has happened in 7 of the last 8 presidential elections where Democrats had wasted more votes than Republicans had. And the interesting thing is that in the first 12 presidential elections after World War II, it was Republicans that were wasting more votes than Democrats were, and now it's kind of flipped around. My former colleague at the Cooperative, I sold it to Amy Walter. She was on the board of another institution higher learning here again, and then. But anyway, when I sold to Amy, one of our colleagues, David Wasserman, he used to have jokingly say that if Democrats wanted to win a majority in the House and hold on to it for a long period of time, what they should do is take a lot of their money and to engage in a large voter relocation program. Encourage Democrats to leave big cities. I mean, think about it. If you got a bunch of Democrats to leave Portland and move up here in the 2nd district, Democrats might actually win it. I'm talking about presidential. But and I just have facetious, but the thing is, it's just different Democratic votes are just a lot more concentrated than Republicans are. And so the national popular vote or in the national polls, basically inflate Democratic strength. So there is some magic number, and they call it, as the New York Times wrote about this a couple of days ago, of whether, the difference. I mean, a lot of people have been thinking, well, a Democrat needs to win the national vote by, 2.5, 3, 4, maybe even 5 percentage points before that's likely to translate down into 270 electoral votes. Now, there's no way for us to know now what it is. And Cohen's piece in the New York Times basically suggested that it may not be quite as much as last time, when Biden won by 240 to 2.4 percentage points, as I said, 7 million votes, but Electoral College voted by 126,000 votes. But there's some magic unknowable number that Harris has to win by before she's likely to become picking up 270 electoral votes. And this has just been happening. And one other thing is that if you take, look at all 50 states, Biden's entire margin, national margin, was in New York and his largest in New York and California. So in other words, Trump had large in the other 48, you lump all the other 48, and that is true with Hillary Clinton, with California, New York, and it was true with Barack Obama, even 2012. So this is it's a crime problem for Democrats that they just can't run up the score in states and expect to win a really, really close race. They've got to sort of do better than that. Now, if you asked a cross-section of Americans, do you consider yourself a Democrat or an independent? And basically what you get is about 30% will say, I'm a Democrat. And if you question them, you'd find that they would vote Democratic about 95% of the time. And for whatever reason they didn't like their nominee, they would either not vote at all, or maybe they'd skip over that office, or maybe they'd just hold their nose and do it. But basically, there are very, very, very few defections. About 30% call themselves Republicans. Same thing applies over there. And then 40% claim that they're independent. But the thing about it is, this 40% that are independent, if you just ask them one simple question, would you say you lean to the Democratic side or you lean to the Republican side? 3/4 of them either lean Democrat, lean Republican, basically equally proportion. And then if you start and question them, they vote that way about 85% of the time. And so what happens is you've got a bunch of people who have some deep inner-seating psychological need to call themselves independents. But actually speaking, they're partisans, And so what we're really, really talking about is about 8 to 12% of the potential electorate are, honest to God, pure independents. Now, a few things about these independents. they tend to read, watch, and listen to news less than either partisan Republicans or partisan Democrats. They follow current events less. They watch debates less. I mean, here's the irony. These are people that ought to be watching most closely, and they're the least likely to be watching. But anyway, they tend to be very fickle. They tend to get buyer's remorse. Where presidential voting, oftentimes they vote for one party, most of them will vote for one party, and then God knows what they expected, but they get disappointed and vote against that party in the very next election. And, you know, as I said, you never know what they were expecting, whatever, but they tend to get buyer's remorse. And but one last thing about these pure independents, they vote less than other people. So this 8 to 12% of the potential electorate, reality is it's probably only about 4 to 6%. But it's really hard in advance to figure out which 4 to 6 are pure independents and really guys show up on election day. So this 8 to 12, and decide how to do this next. This 8 to 12, they're really cross pressure. That there are certain things that they're, well, let's go this way. Let's go this way. They tend to, I'll go into more detail in a minute, but they tend to take a somewhat dim view of the Biden-Harris administration's policies on the border and on sort of the economy in general, but specifically the cost of living. And they're really unhappy with elements of this. And there are pushbacks and all things we can talk about now, but that's it. But on the other hand, they look over at former President Trump. And here's a guy that's never been conventional. How's that for an state? And has always been a little bit on the erratic side. And I think since the first of this year, he's been acting a lot more than that. And since President Biden dropped out of the race, a whole lot more than that. And so they're kind of looking over, and they didn't like him personally anyway, but they're looking over thinking, well, we just fired one old guy because we didn't think he was sort of well-equipped for 4 more years. But that was sort of on one basis. But looking at this guy, I'm not really sure. You think about, you're Trump. And I know Chris Latzavita, one of the 2 people run his campaign, that wants to be one of the other. But man, these are really smart people. And they're a heck of a lot smarter than the people that ran Trump in 2016 or 10. And I have a pretty good idea the kind of advice they're giving. I promise you, they're not telling him to talk about immigrants eating cats. Okay? Because every day they keep not talking about this, and this. It's a squandered opportunity, and it looks like he's coming off the radar. And so this 8 to 12 or 4 to 6, they are really, really Trump's pressure. And they don't know what they're going to do. But you'll think about it, and you've got somewhere between 78 to 82% that's just kind of baked in the cake. Or 88 to 92% that are either baked in for Democrats, baked in for Republicans, this thing here, and then get done voting. And they're not sure what they're going to do. And we're probably getting back to what I was talking about at the very beginning. This thing's so close that not all is going to tell us in advance with any degree of confidence who's going to win this thing. And it's sort of yet another reason for that. So let's kind of go to a sort of the situation that we're in. And one thing that I probably should have mentioned earlier, I didn't, is just how volatile the American people, the mood is. And we're now in the 23rd consecutive. There's a question pollsters like to ask. Do you think the country is headed in the right direction, or do you think it's off on the wrong track? And I don't know who sort of wrote that question, but the one person that popularized it was Dick Worthland, who was President Reagan's pollster. And he used to call it the Dow Jones indicator of American politics. Just kind of a really good measure of the public mood. Well, we've now had 23 consecutive years of wrong track, higher than the right direction. And to the point now where it's kind of normal to be wrong. And in fact, actually, it's for a lot of times, the last time for any sustained period of time, I think more people thought right direction than wrong track was right after 9/11. And where anybody that said wrong track, people kind of think they were a little, maybe not patriotic or whatever. But so the default position is wrong track, but how far in the wrong track? And it's pretty, it's a pretty good barometer of sort of the general public mood. But one thing that's interesting, I have a couple, is that one Republican friend, Bruce Melton, and a Democrat friend, Doug Sosnick. There's different people, analysts, but each one sort of used the variation of these statistics. But I want to give credit because this is an academic institution. I don't be accused of plagiarism. But you take the 1960s and 70s, and you think, okay, control of the House, control of the Senate, who has the White House? In the 1960s and 70s combined, there were 10 elections. And in 3 of those 10, either the House or the Senate or the presidency or some combination flipped at some point during those 20 years. 3 out of 10. In the 80s and 90s, it was 4 times out of those 10. But in the last 12, starting in 2000, it's 10 out of 12. So people, it's kind of hair trigger. It doesn't take much. But there's 2 different things. One is it doesn't take much. But the second is the parties now are so evenly divided that it doesn't take much movement at all to flip certainly the House or the presidency or the Senate. I'll take the Senate's kind of its own little animal, I'll talk about that more in a few minutes, but extremely, extremely, extremely volatile. So let's think about the last couple of years. And if you kind of go back to 2000 and 2020, when you can look at President Biden's victory and say, for 4.5 percentage points that would be in, or you could focus on the 126,000. I tend to focus on the latter because that's sort of size who wins, who loses. But I have a theory, and don't worry, I'm going to trash the other side too in a couple of minutes, but I have a theory that when someone is elected president, it's like they're issued a credit card. But the credit limit on that credit card is determined by the magnitude of the win. Now, some of that's presidential, what percentage of the vote did you get, what your overall margin was, but how many electoral votes did you get, how many states did you win, how much did you win a state by, how big was the magnitude of your win, but also, do you have a Senate majority? What happened in the Senate? Do you have a Senate majority? How big is that Senate majority? Do you have a majority in the House? How'd you do in the House? Do you pick up a bunch of seats? How big? Do you have? So it's sort of the whole package together. And so that if you want to do really big things, you kind of need to win the election big. And if you don't win the election big, logic would suggest in an evenly divided country, you kind of scale back your ambitions to a smaller piece. And this would apply both to Republicans after 2017, after Trump won, having lost the popular vote, won the electoral college, and they had zero majorities in the House and the Senate. So it was true then, and it's true for Democrats in 2021, is if you want to do big things, you win the election bid. And I personally, and I'm old-fashioned, I think that mandates are not self-proclaimed. And that when you've got, call it 44, 45, 46, I'm going to vote Democrat no matter what, 44, 45, 46, going to vote Republican no matter what. The country, there is no consensus. You know, there are no landslides anymore. Landslides are generally defined as a win by 10 percentage points. So we don't have landslides anymore. But what that means is there are no mandates. So you can declare yourself as having a mandate, but how far, how hard you push, how far you want to go can be kind of problematic if you know that 44, 45, 46% are going to be against you no matter what. And this little 8 to 12 or 4 to 6% group in the middle, pretty squirrely, can have no coherent, real, political philosophy to begin with. And sometimes when you talk to them, like, list of focus groups of them, they're interesting people. They can be really liberal in one thing, they can be really conservative in something else, and they can be telling us something that's just outright nonsense. But, as George W. Bush would say, they're the deciders. So most of us, I watched Joe Biden. It's fun, actually. I worked on Capitol Hill while I was in college and started working up there. I came to Washington September 72 and started working on Hill part-time jobs in January 73. So Joe Biden and I went on the Senate payroll the same month, January 73. Now, he was a freshman senator and I was a freshman in college, so we had a lot in common. But actually, I was working for a senator from my hometown, who was one of another Democrat elected, President Democrat elected in that class. But anyway, if you watch Biden in the Senate for 36 years, what you saw was a guy that was never in the third of Democratic senators that were the most liberal. He was never the third of Democratic senators that were the most conservative. Because Alabama, Arkansas, Louisiana, a lot of conservative. He was sort of always in the middle third. And when he ran for, he had run and lost in 88, he had run and lost in 2008, was running in 2020, and had, by virtue of being the vice president under Barack Obama, had, effectively coloring recognition among Democrats, and was generally kind of low high. But there was a reticence about going with that. That first of all, he was going to be 81 election day. Or 78 election day, it's 81 now, but going to be 78. And basically a little white guy in a party that's skewing younger, more diverse, more minority. So it's sort of not really matching up with where the party was or where it was going. But the other thing is, it kind of acts as Trump. It had a tendency to say things that, probably weren't the best thing to say. And we all do that. Sometimes our mouths run a little faster than our brains. And some people want to charge that up to older age. But I can tell you that Biden was, I think I'm better than 73, I like it. But, it was Greek, he was doing that in his 30s, 40s, okay? So you get this kind of, like I love him, that's just who he is. But one of all this is, he came in 4th place in the Iowa caucus, came in 5th place in the New Hampshire primary. And that generally means you're roadkill. That you'll be in the history books as having run, maybe not the big trend, but things small. You're there. And you had, remember, Bernie Sanders was here, Elizabeth Warren was here, and then Elizabeth Warren started moving up and Bernie was coming down, and Elizabeth Warren kind of passed them up. And this is really kind of fascinating, I think. Elizabeth Warren's big deal always was like consumer finance and the little guy gets screwed by big people. And that's like her, that's her first thing. Because she really wants smart people ever to be elected to the Senate. But that was kind of her deal. And healthcare policy, that had never been, big emphasis for her. But everybody was talking about how to go right and have all God's children had to have healthcare policy. And so she needed one, didn't really have one, and she just kind of plucked Bernie's off the shelf. Now, there's a big difference between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. Nobody expects Bernie's numbers to work. But how are you going to pay me back? I'll expect Bernie to do that. Well, but Elizabeth Warren, she's kind of held up to a little bit higher standard, and she couldn't explain how the finance was going to work. Of course she could, and they did. But anyway, and so she kind of started, she pulled up ahead of Bernie, and then there's a nose guy. He started picking. So he wins sort of the more progressive lane and eclipses her, wins the progressive lane. Meanwhile, in sort of the leftist center, but not that left, you had a dozen different Democratic candidates. Besides Biden, we have Buttigieg and Klobuchar. You had all these people in there, and that's not even getting down into the Johnson personnel, like that. But seeing blood and people like that. But anyway, it's the center left is split like a dozen ways, and Mike Bloomberg is coming in with all the money in the world. And so Democrats, and you could look at it and say, they may not be the smartest party in the world, but they looked at this and said, wait a minute, in about 3 weeks or so, Bernie is going to be the nominee, and this might not be the best idea ever. And in something, I've never seen anything quite like it. I think it was the closest thing to an immaculate conception we'll ever see in American politics. But Joe Biden goes from roadkill to the de facto nominee in about 3 weeks. And the only specific discernible event was Congressman Joe Clyburn endorsing him, before the South Carolina primary. So, and then it just happened. And he's there. He went, and then the pandemic starts really kind of biting in, and then everything was shut down. And over the summer, the Democrats kind of took the pandemic more seriously than Republicans did. And so basically finishes out the primary season, goes in the summer, and into the fall campaign, mostly in his basement in Wilmington. Now, the thing is, politicians, I don't care how old you are, when you make mistakes, is usually when you get tired. And to go out and follow candidates around, New Hampshire or Iowa, whatever, is grueling. I remember spending 2 days on a bus trip with Hillary Clinton in Iowa. And, she's like a dozen years older than I am. And I thought, how does she do this? I was like, you're report down for the bus at 6 o'clock in the morning. You get back to around midnight, and then you start doing it again at the same time. But anyway, so there's a certain advantage to being able to do that, where you're kind of at home and you kind of go out, or maybe you have a short little trip either into Wilmington or maybe, fly someplace, do one talk, come back. And so anyway, the point of it was, and again, I'm not knocking Biden, and I'm going to knock, and I will knock Trump in a minute, but the thing is, you win the nomination because you're not Bernie Sanders, and you win the general election because you're not Donald Trump. Fundamentally, that's sort of what happened. And although it seemed big, 4.517 million, but really, it was actually sort of just barely. So that was kind of pretty unusual circumstance. So they come in, and then you have the American Rescue Act. And, the economy, the pandemic obviously had been horrible, and the economy kind of bottomed out during the summer of 2020, but was sort of coming back. And, if you want to give Donald Trump credit, fine. If you don't want to give credit, that's fine too. But, it's kind of coming back, but it is fragile. Definitely needed some economic stimulus, but how much? And the Biden folks, it was kind of interesting. They seemed to be consumed by what had happened to Obama. back in 2009, after Obama won 2008. And, financial crisis, economy gone to a tailspin, and Obama gets, which kept McCain from really ever getting really that close in the fall of 2010. So Obama won, you remember, and they pushed through a stimulus package, but the stimulus package, most people look back and say, it probably wasn't big enough, which is why it took kind of longer than expected hope to get out of that economic downturn. So a lot of people say the Obama stimulus package wasn't big enough. Now, a lot of people could say, yeah, but guess what? That's as much as we were going to get. Republicans weren't going to give us a dime more. And there's probably some truth in that too. But anyway, and so the president and his folks sort of said, you know what? The danger is not going too big. The danger is going too small. And we're going to swing from the fences. We're going to get as much stimulus as we can because we saw it and Obama. And what was interesting about that is Larry Summers, who I think is one of the smartest people I've ever met, but he wrote an op-ed piece in the Post on Biden's 50th day in office that said, basically said, the stimulus package that the administration's looking at, it's like way too big. And that piece he did specifically say 4 to 5 times bigger than it should have been, but later on basically set back. And his theory was, if this is where the economy was without the pandemic, and this is where the economy is, you try to figure out what's the gap between here and here, and you try to do a stimulus package that makes up for that gap, get you back to here. So you kind of calibrate. But swinging for the fences, going for as much as you possibly can, and Democrats were able to get through that, big $1,400 checks and all that stuff going out. And you saw within 5-6 weeks, you start seeing inflation starting to pick up. Now, at this point, there were going into the summer of 2021, and the border had been not looking so great. It hadn't cost Biden any points. And people were committing, the thing is, for obvious reasons, when Trump was there, a lot of people that wanted to come in and didn't have the documentation, some coming in, some wanted to come in, but, knew that it wasn't going to be easy. But as soon as Trump was leaving, basically, our folks thought, hey, it's a green light. The development signs out, come on in. And so they start coordinating. And it's not that Biden invited them or anything, but they're coming over the board, and people are looking at this, and they're, some people are just objecting to it in general. Some said, you ought to have some kind of board, some kind of control, and are they doing anything? Are they trying to do anything? And anyway, there's all that, but it wasn't according to the president's knowledge. And his job approval ratings were, using the Gallup numbers, starting into late January, they were in the mid to high 50s. And they saw in June of 2021, the president had a 56% approval rating, Gallup called 56%. It proceeded to drop 14 points by October. So in October, his approval rating was 42% in the Gallup. So 14-point drop between June and October. That's a heck of a drop. Now, you had the border was simmering, but had really cost at that point. But you had inflation starting to come up for the first time in 30 years. And then you had the execution of the withdrawal from Afghanistan in late August. Anyway, so the president's numbers start dropping, and they never really recovered, And he was at 43% in August, and this month I think he dropped back down to 39%. Anyway, this is sort of what Harris is having to deal with is the campers not real happy with the way things had gone. And her challenge is, how can I be changed? Clearly, the American people want change. But I'm the vice president. When they say Biden Harris, that's, how do you represent change and not continuity? How do you do that? And I heard of podcast recently where Cargill suggested don't try to say you're Che. Che, you're fresh. You're new. Young. Sort of, which, okay, it's more plausible, certainly. But that's where she's got to be. And to try and create a little bit of distance, but not be disloyal and not tick off people that, everybody or that still likes Biden a lot. And so it's kind of a sticky thing. Then you go to the other side and you'll look at what President Trump is doing. As I said a few minutes ago, I promise you, Chris Wasabine and Susie Wiles, they're not telling you to talk about immigrants and eating pets. And every time you see him go off the rails, it's not going to peel away people out there in the Trump base or people are going to vote for Republican, but in that middle. So this is really what this comes down to, the 4 to 6 or 8 to 12, depending on your definition. And are they willing to give her a shot? Is she paying enough? Or is she continuity with what swing voters don't particularly like? Interesting, fine. Or is this guy stable enough for another 4 years? And that's what they're telling you. And I don't know what they're going to do. I really, really don't. I don't think we're gonna know. And the question is, like, how many days after election day will we know? If you saw report, it's going to require a hand count, and 3 people in each polling place has to count by hand. I thought Democrats ought to suggest, you can't use a computer or a calculator. You have to use an abacus. If it's going to be absurd, go ahead and be absurd. But anyway, so what was I going to say? But U.S. House and the Senate, real quickly, and then we'll go to questions, comments, and accusations. The House, even though 435 members, and even though there's 50 or so more or less competitive districts, which is nothing. And I can remember when I started the newsletter in '84, there were years where we have 140, 150. 1 year it close to 160 competitive House rates. Like 1 out of 3 seats in the House were competitive, and now it's just a fraction of that. But the thing is, the House, generally speaking, even with that, more or less reflects what the country's go. And if the country is evenly divided, guess what? The House is going to be pretty evenly divided. And so coming out of 2020, when Democrats lost House seat, but they still had a majority, but it was only 60 out of 435, and then after the 2022 election, Republicans gained seats, and they get majority in the House, but they didn't get nearly what they thought, what they expected, and given where Biden's approval ratings they should have gotten, you would normally think we got. Anyway, so they have a majority of 6. Right now, I think it's 4 with special elections and deaths and vacancies, and whatever. But anyway, so it's going to be really, really, really close. The only reason, if there had been a government shutdown, it wouldn't have made it a done deal, but it probably would have put a thumb on the scale that would help Democrats. But, that's not happening. But if there's any reason to put a thumb on the scale in favor of Republicans, the only reason would be that it's generally, even though the advantage of incumbency isn't what it used to be, it's still there. And there's like one vulnerable Republican open seat in the entire House. And so if they're in the majority, it basically has to come out of knocking incumbents off. And again, that's just sort of more challenging. And Democrats have some seats that are on the phone. But I wouldn't call it's just really, really close. Now, the Senate, as I said, the House, it reflects on sort of what's going on in the country. The Senate does, because as all of you know, only a third of the Senate's up every 2 years, and it matters which third is up. And in each of these classes, class 1, class 2, class 3, they're up, they're not, like a microcosm of the country. This time, Democrats are defending 23 Senate seats. Republicans have 11. And so you didn't know what's up. You say, gosh, Democrats are defending a lot more territory. They got more places they could potentially lose than Republicans do, which is true. But then when you look at where they are, now, one thing that's interesting is that people don't split their tickets much anymore. Voting for, a Democrat for one office or Republican for the other. They just don't. They used to do it a good bit. But in 2016 was the first election in American history that every single U.S. Senate race was won by the same side that carried that state presidential. Every single one. 10 or 4. And in 2020, 33 out of 34 went. What was the other city? Maine. Only one where Biden carried the state, not the second district, but he carried the state. And so the Collins, won the Senate race. And Pew Research Center has crunched all the numbers from 2012 on. There have been like 190 Senate races, and all but and it's like 91% were won by the same party that carried it to that high for if it was a midterm election 2 years earlier. So it just goes. People like split tickets. In the House, it's like 95%. So when you look at the Senate races up this time, Democrats are defending 3 Senate seats in states that Trump carried twice. Both West Virginia, Ohio, and Montana. Now, if you're a Democrat in a state that Trump carried twice, your chances of surviving are not real good, which is why Joe Manchin in West Virginia pulled out. The others are, Don Kester in Montana, and Sherry Brown in Ohio. And where Kester, he's not dead, but his chance of surviving, Trump's going to win Montana like 20 points. So it would really, and the Republican candidate's not very good, but, when your side's winning the presidency by 20 points in the state, you have to be very good. And Sherry Brown, got quite as Republican, still more. Then they got Democrats are defending 4 more Senate seats. They didn't state that Trump carried in 2016, but not 2020. They got open seats in Arizona and Michigan, and then defending 2 incumbents, Bob Casey in Pennsylvania and Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin. Then there's Nevada with the Democrat Jackie Rosen, who in a state that Hillary Clinton won narrowly, Biden won narrowly, but both were narrow, so it's not iffy state. And then you've got a story situation in Maryland where it's a very, very, very Democratic state, but the Republicans are on one looking at Republican state possibly win, and former governor, that's who they're running. And the Democrats seem to have a bit of an edge, but it's going to be very close, and it could go either way. But the Democrats' definition, point of all this is that you push West Virginia's Republicans are going to pick up for sure, so that takes the Senate to 50-50. My guess is that you're going to get Republicans to 52, 53, something like that. Could it go 54 or higher? Yeah. Could it be just 51? It'd be hard to see that happen, but 52, 58. And how deep all the Democrats get in is kind of critical, because when you look at the seats that are up in 26 and 28, there aren't a lot of really good opportunities for Democrats to knock off Republican seats. So how far in the hole they drop is a really, really big deal. So obviously the governing configuration is huge. That you saw in 2017, Trump won the presidency, Republicans had the Senate and the House, and you had an agenda that, a conservative, a populist, a Republican really, really liked. Then in 2020, Biden won, Democrats had, 50-50 Senate, and with Harris scraping tied, and a small majority in the House. So, but if you get Trump, Republican Senate, Republican House, if you're a Democrat or left of center, or you sound like Donald Trump, it would be hell on earth. On the other hand, if you're a Republican or a populist, you're going to make, hey, this is pretty awesome. Divided government would probably be the single most widespread, where, each party has one of those 3. and where there's some checks and balances in place. But that's probably the third most likely outcome. But the second most, obviously, would be a Republican trifecta. The chances of Democrats winning the Senate is really small. So winning a Democratic trifecta is almost non-existent. So anyway, I talked way too long. I deliberately not looked at my watch. But I'll gladly just open up for questions or comments or accusations, and just sort of wave. I'm not going to give all the things I meant to say. I didn't, but just wave your arms in a non-threatening fashion. You're the person so.
About that, of the fact that like the two on the side, the two independent. I think that 20 years ago, Lilio, this one used to be my favorite. I think that it used to be that the economy would be to how the election go. The economy is good. The economy usually be the economy is bad. And the economy is the people usually have to know this, but I thought that's not like that. That voters no longer voting, being about the economy. They have the butters if the economy about
Yeah.
good. So
No, you're absolutely right. But I think there's another element that's also important. Back in the old days, you had two very broad-based political major parties that were ideologically and geographically diverse. And so they had sort of built-in moderating influence. And I like to use as a example, look at all the stuff I didn't say. That's it to that. All right. I use, just because it's me, that January of 73, when I started working on the Hill part-time. In those days, there were 18 states had 2 Democrats in the Senate, okay? They included Alabama, Arkansas, Indiana, Iowa, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, Montana, and South Dakota. Now there are no Democrats from any of those states. There were 2 Democrats in each of those last time, or then. In those days, you had 2 Republicans from Maryland, New York, Oregon, Pennsylvania, and Vermont. So you had liberal moderate Republicans that were and centrist Republicans that were moderate influences in their party. And I'm just using the Senate as sort of a metric. You had conservative Democrats and centrists that were moderate, but you had 2 overlapping parties. And if you think about it, who would have been most likely to defect from a party in election? Well, for Democrats, it'd be conservative Democrats would be the first ones to jump over the side, and centrists would be, on the Republican side, it'd be liberal or centrist Republicans that would drop out. But when you basically lost virtually all conservative Democrats, and you lose basically all liberal Republicans, and centrists stop voting in party primaries, then what was like this with the big overlapping, and keep in mind, these people in the middle, these are the people that forge compromises, that build a consensus. So now the parties go like this. And they basically have almost no shared views on things of importance. But they're the ones that would defect. And that's and so that's where, and political scientists, not everybody else, I will not political scientists, they used to complain that our parties were not coherent, ideologically coherent, that we shouldn't have conservative Democrats. They should be over there. We shouldn't be liberal Republicans. They should be over there. But the thing about it is, what if it's incoherent? It was balancing with moderating influences. We've lost that. And so parties are sort of going off doing that. And I think that, along with evenly divided country, is why we're swinging back and forth, where a party gets in, usually just barely, and then they overplay their hand, then they get thrown out, the other party comes in, then they overplay their hand, then they get thrown out. I mean, oversimplifying a little bit, that's kind of what's been happening tonight. But yeah, you're right that but people, you're right. Cultural issues are more important, and the other thing that I left out was negative partisanship. The idea of people who hate the other party more than they even like their own party. Actually, despise is probably a better word. And that is one of the driving things. And, there's all kinds of fascinating data about people in each party who, they're asked to say, do you think people of the other party, they're immoral, they're ignorant. They can't say enough bad things about people in the other party, and they assume the worst. And, again, another contributing factor to the parties just moving way, way, way apart. And meanwhile, you have lots of Americans that are sort of in the middle, but by and large, they're not voting in primaries that much. And, it's fascinating to me that Angus King, that, screw it, I'll be an independent. That way I don't have to worry about fighting a primary from somebody on my left. I think it's kind of amazing that Collins hasn't decided to do that. Say, I'd have a lot more freedom if I were an independent. But anyway, of course, where you get the money to run the re-election, but no. Yeah, come on right there.
Oh, hi. Thanks for coming to Spain. Don't go back. I question you can avoid it. This is the bigger thing they really had Richard no information. Even that we're running statewide hat and it's the going to see worse. And you talked about whether the downgrade the first banking on the fast and fast or little test pull them to the red side or this can make them out of Balkan. What did that feel to encourage the that plan about it?
Because the way you're wording that, Emily, makes them think that you know what I'm going to say. Because what I would have said, if you just said, what do you think the impact of abortion on this? What I would have said is, the real question is, will you be speaking to me after I give you an answer? But I think you actually, and let me just put up, I'm pro-choice, okay? No ifs, ands, buts. My only two grandchildren are IVF babies. My credentials are perfectly good. After the 2022 election, and Republicans should have been kicking and taking names. They should have had a great election. And it did. They did. And the conventional wisdom was that, millions and millions of pro-choice voters turned out because of the Dobbs decision, and that's what happened. And, that's absolutely logical, it's reasonable, but the data doesn't support it. And here's, in 2022, you always want to compare apples and apples, oranges and oranges. So you compare one midterm to the previous midterm, one presidential to the previous presidential, right? In 2022, Democrats won 10 million fewer votes for the House of Representatives. The only thing that was on the ballot everywhere. 10 million fewer than 4 years earlier in the previous midterm. Republicans got 3.6 million, actually it was 3.7 million more votes in 22 than 18. So if there were millions and millions of pro-choice voters flocking to the polls, either they didn't vote, it wasn't reflected in the House, that's for damn sure. And my theory is that what happened in the election, it had little to do, I think, with Dobbs, and had more to do with who Republicans nominated in about 20 specific races around the country that just happened to be like the critical ones. Now, my wife is trying to get me to stop using the term wackos to describe certain kinds of candidates on the far left or the far right. And so I'm trying to be compliant. So I now use the term exotic and potentially problematic. And which is another way of saying that, you know what. I mean, just the cuts. And it went across the board, but it was the ones that mattered. And for example, 4 U.S. Senate races: Arizona, Georgia, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania. Now, you could say Marcus, New Hampshire, right? So you had 2 Republicans running. And you have Chuck Norris, who was whatever the state Senate president or leader or whatever, okay? Actually, I think he's running for governor now. But anyway, he was sort of more or less the conventional buck. And then you had Don Bolduc, Don, who I honor in service to our country as a special forces and brigadier general, and I honor that. But the guy's nuts. And Mitch McConnell's super PAC spent $1 zillion to try to keep the nut from winning the Republican nomination in vain. Because the nut got the nomination and then promptly lose. And that Jeanne Shaheen was, if they had nominated the same Republican, it would have been a good race. Maybe should have won, maybe not, but it would have been a competitive race. This ended not being. Arizona, Georgia, Herschel Walker, Bolduc mentioned, Pennsylvania, Dr. Oz. Now, I thought Fetterman was a nut before he had his health issues. So I think, somebody asked me just before the election, who do you think's going to win in Pennsylvania? And my response was, I can't tell you who's going to win in Pennsylvania, but I can tell you who's going to lose. The people of Pennsylvania. Because neither of these people ought to be in the U.S. Senate. And we were having lunch, and I won't for you the whole story. But in Georgia, there were 9 Republican statewide nominees. None. 8 out of 9 of them won. The only one that lost was Herschel Walker. Now, I told a story about having sat next to him on a plane and whatever, 20 years ago. But the thing is, he has about as much business being in the U.S. Senate as I do winning a Heisman Trophy. And the thing is, that was when you can't blame Republican primary voters, because that was just a Trump thing and forced it on him. I mean, the rest you can just go label primary vote. But some more governor's races in Arizona, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, 4 Secretary of State. Now, nobody has ever cared who wins Secretary of State races outside of that state until now with election stuff, right? That would be Arizona, Michigan, Minnesota, and Nevada. 4 attorneys general: Arizona, Michigan, Nevada, and Mexico. You see some patterns here where the inmates have taken over the side. So it's just that the Republicans probably would have done pretty well if they had nominated exotic and potentially problematic candidates in a couple of dozen places, and it cost them. And they know that. They know that. But anyway, so okay, let's go. Boom. Okay.
You took a group of people, but it's very difficult to reach, to ask their opinion, especially in the 24-year-old groups, Black and some non-college youth. You also have Latinos, Asian Americans, and so forth. But obviously, they can simply have an impact. How do we bring those people into the mix of who really is going to decide that?
Well, it's a great question. And in some cases, you know what the percentage of this or that was in the last election. And if you come up shy with that, you can weigh them up or down. Now, it's not a good way, but I mean, the thing is, the conventional wisdom after 16 was there were these shy Trump voters. It had them after the term shy Tory voters at anyone. And the people that just wouldn't say that they were going to vote for Trump. Now, I don't know how true that is. Of my relatives back in Louisiana, Arkansas, the ones that voted for Trump weren't really shocked. A couple really obnoxious about it. It's anyway, not that could be. But what the research shows more, a better explanation was you have a group of people that are low trust voters. They don't like they don't like big government, big business, big media, big legs. They don't like big, and they don't trust strangers. And they're just not going to respond to an interview. And they aren't all Republican, and they aren't all Trump supporters, but they are disproportionately that direction. You know, you can find some Bernie people and stuff like that, but low trust voters tend to be more over here. And so they've done a lot of research to try to figure out how do you compensate for it. And the least scientific, but one way of doing it is, what happened in that state or that district or the country in 2020. And you ask, when you've done your interviewing, you ask them, who did they go for? And there's generally a little bit of, people generally are less likely, usually, to say they backed a loser, but you kind of know the pattern of that. So that they kind of wait there, so that when they find someone, a Trump voter, a populist, and someone that seems to be kind of a low trust voter, but you didn't get the interview, you bump them up, you weigh them up. And it's not a great way. But, you know, if you find a better way, some pointer will pay you a lot of money, you know, to show how, it's not great, but it does. But the thing is, that we are seeing, we started seeing in 2016 more Latino voters, but particularly Latino men, that had been pretty Democratic route, but defecting in larger numbers. And there were, you know, a lot of things going on. And again, in 2020. And then in 20, and more recently, you started seeing that with African-American men usually, and particularly African-American young men. And there's some political scientists that have a theory that African-Americans above a certain age, they were either alive or aware, you know, during the civil rights movement, or wasn't that long ago. And so the bond between the African-American community and the Democratic Party because of the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Act was sort of there. But once you get a generation or so down, a ways removed from that, that becomes something bad in history. So there's less of a gravitational pull. Or the other way of looking at it is that a long time ago we started seeing non-college whites, or non-college white, or not college whites with a less than a 4-year college degree, kind of edging away from the Democratic Party, particularly men, but moving away. And a lot of people said, well, this is race, and they're, you know, or it's basically, they're doing this for racial reason. But, you know, when you start seeing that happening some among African Americans, and that happening some among Latinos, at some point you kind of wonder, that part may not be race. And maybe they're voting less on skin tone and more their economic situation, their life, you know, that sort of thing. And that that there could be some of that going on too. But, you know, all these are things where pollsters, you know, regardless of what party you're in, they know there's a problem. They're trying. Maybe they fixed it, which I don't want to further know for. But, you know, so we'll see. But I think we just need to kind of back off a little bit and not expect unrealistically a precision that's not there. But no question to change the patterns. I saw the right? You think we try about one, maybe two more? We have 1, 2 more. And boy, President Clinton used to say, "I'll be here till the last dog dies." I'm going to talk to anybody here realize for one more. Yeah, go ahead.
As a first-time voter coming from, what are some of the things that I should be looking at?
Did you say coming from PA? What part?
Just about 45 minutes north of Philadelphia.
Pick up. It's like Bucks County? Bucks County?
What are some of the things that I should be looking for to determine who I vote?
this doesn't mean specific to your party. I mean, any office, but and I, I'm hardly representative of anybody. But to me, I would have a hard time voting for someone that wasn't ready, willing, and able to vote, to work with someone that wears a different colored jersey than they do, and somebody that may feel somewhat differently. Someone that's at least try to find some common ground, or at least be civil. And I realize that, issues matter. But the thing, part of what's happened is that if you approach choice, you are in favor of some measures in terms of controlling guns. You do this, that. You're over here. You're a Democrat. That's just part of your DNA. And just as other people, it's a part of it. And so a lot of people, they're not even looking at individual issues because it's kind of baked in. They don't, now you get some exception to the rule. Jared Golden is a guy that, is obviously, at least the way politics is right now, God didn't necessarily intend for a Democrat to hold this congressional district. And, that's why we were talking at lunch, is that, people on the left that complain about him, it's like, you know what, if he gives you one vote, first vote in January, anything you get above that's gravy, because that poor guy, he's, but, the kinds of people that, and Bill Collins, the people that would just rise above that, we're seeing very little of that. And for those younger people, and let me say something to Republicans, and I recently was in a meeting with a handful of Republican senators, and we had this conversation that Republicans paid a price in 22 because they nominated lousy people. With maybe one exception in Senate races, they're not as bad this time, but there aren't many rock stars in their group. And I was with a Republican pollster recently who was basically saying the kinds of people that are built to win competitive states can't win primaries, can't win primary. And if you can't win the primary, what's the point of putting yourself and your family through it? And if you're a Republican, you kind of need to worry that you're nominating people that can win in really red places, but can't win, have a really hard time in purple places, and can't possibly win in a bluish place. And I don't think it's as immediately profound on the Democratic side, but it is getting, more that way. And I don't think there's a silver bullet. I think ranked choice is a start. It's not perfect, but I think it's better than nothing. I do like the idea of doing the Maine route in terms of congressional district electors. I think there are things you can do, but I think more importantly, if people that are kind of on the centrist side, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, if you don't like who your party's nominating, then find somebody you do like and convince them to run and back them and give them money and work in their campaigns. But until more relatively centrist people decide they want to take their party back over again, this is just going to get this way over and over, and we're going to have this ping-pong public policy of just swinging wildly from one extreme to the other. And that's no way to run a railroad. So, I've never met a voter that had like clipboard and sicked up, 30 issues and, counting up, commenting. That's kind of a useful exercise. But I would also look at who seems to be a good person and who seems to be somebody that could work with other people. And again, Bill Cohen to be as a model of somebody that was able to do that. But that's kind of hard. I think I've worn out my belt.
No, not we can stay on slash.
I was one, and if University of Maine ever wants to be back, I might put a timer on the microphone. I'd be happy to come back. This sounds good.
And thank you all for coming out on Friday afternoon.
And I hope you have a wonderful family and friends weekend. And we have a parting gift that we'd like to leave with Charlie for taking the time to share his wonderful analysis with us today. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's it.
No, we've got the black papers.
It May Blackberries.
Okay, you got it.
Because there's another school, it's polar bears.
Yep, that's true. In your neck of the woods.
Yeah, and are there any other bears that are...
And no, we got mules. I don't know what they.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm glad.